Imagine this. A simple morning walk with a dog spirals into a full-blown showdown where one person loses control and the other loses everything. He thought his taunts would go unanswered, but one move turned his entire world upside down. What brought him to his knees before the truth? Let's find out. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, painting the small Texas town in warm hues of orange and gold. For most people, mornings like this were about enjoying the peace and quiet. For Lorraine, 36, it was her sacred time with Titan, her 90-pound Doberman. Titan wasn't just a dog, he was her fortress, her shadow, and sometimes her only real companion in a world that often felt cold and judgmental. Lorraine lived in a modest apartment on the edge of town. She didn't need much, just a roof over her head, her scrubs for her shifts at the hospital, and Titan waiting for her at the door every evening. But as much as she kept to herself, the universe had a way of throwing her into the paths of people like Walter. Walter was, well, Walter, a 45-year-old self-proclaimed guardian of community values. With his oversized gut and a smug grin plastered across his face, he acted like the park was his kingdom. The man practically made a career out of picking the fights where they didn't belong. His favorite pastime? Poking at Lorraine? Something about her existence just seemed to set him off. Lorraine spotted him from a distance as she walked Titan through the park. She sighed inwardly. Not today, please, not today. But Walter had other plans. He swaggered over like he'd been waiting for her. Well, well, look who it is. Our local street queen parading around with her monster, Walter bellowed, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of a couple of joggers. He laughed like he'd just delivered the joke of the century. The joggers glanced over but kept moving. No one ever stuck around to interfere. Lorraine clenched Titan's leash a little tighter. She wasn't in the mood. "Good morning to you too, Walter," she said flatly, her tone making it clear she wasn't interested in a conversation. But Walter thrived on pushing buttons. "Oh, come on, don't be shy. You ever think about joining the circus? You and that beast of yours could really put on a show." He pointed dramatically at Titan. "Or maybe he's your bodyguard, huh? Keeping you safe from all those imaginary enemies you're so scared of?" Titan let out a low, rumbling growl, his ears pinning back. It wasn't like him to react like this, but Walter had a way of bringing out the worst in everyone. Lorraine reached down to steady Titan, her hand trembling slightly, not out of fear, but out of barely contained anger. "Mind your own business, Walter," she snapped, her voice sharp but controlled. "I don't have to stand here and listen to your nonsense every morning." "Oh, look at her, acting all proper and high and mighty," Walter sneered, taking a step closer. "Let me give you some friendly advice. You and your oversized mutt don't belong here. Why don't you just go back to wherever it is you people come from?" His words hit like a slap, but Lorraine had heard it all before. Still, something about today felt different. Maybe it was the way Titan was tensing up beside her, his muscles coiled like a spring. Maybe it was the smirk on Walter's face, as if he thought he'd already won. Lorraine pulled Titan's leash gently, signaling it was time to leave. But as she turned to walk away, she felt the leash jerk in her hand. Titan had stopped, his eyes locked on Walter. His growl deepened, more menacing this time. It wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. Even Lorraine froze for a moment, caught off guard by her usually gentle dog's intensity. "What's the matter, buddy? Did I hurt your feelings?" Walter taunted, leaning down as if to provoke the dog further. Lorraine tightened her grip on the leash, her voice low but firm. "Back off, Walter. I'm serious." But Walter just laughed. "What's he gonna do, huh? Bark me to death?" The tension in the air was palpable, the kind that made your stomach twist and your heart race. Lorraine didn't know what was about to happen, but one thing was clear. This morning was far from ordinary. The tension was thick, like the air before a thunderstorm. Walter, always eager to stir the pot, yanked his phone out of his pocket with a theatrical flair, holding it up like it was some kind of weapon. Well, well, isn't this convenient?" he sneered, angling the camera directly at Lorraine and Titan. "Look at this, folks. Exhibit A, our local celebrity breaking all the rules with her personal zoo. Can't wait to see what the cops think about this." His voice was a mix of smugness and malice, the kind that made your skin crawl. Lorraine felt her chest tighten as her pulse quickened. This wasn't the first time Walter had tried to intimidate her, but this, filming her, This was a new low, even for him. She took a step back, gripping Titan's leash tighter. "Seriously, Walter? You're a grown man and this is what you do for fun?" She shot back, her voice steady but edged with frustration. "Do you really have nothing better to do?" Walter just grinned, the kind of grin that said, "Yay, I'm loving this." He took a slow, deliberate step forward, keeping the camera rolling. "Oh, I've got plenty to do," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But hey, this is a public service. People deserve to know what's going on in their parks, don't you think?" Lorraine clenched her jaw, her frustration bubbling over. "You're pathetic," she snapped, her voice louder now. "A grown man acting like a playground bully. Just leave me alone." But Walter wasn't the type to back down. He took another step closer, his grin turning into a smirk. "Oh, is that your big comeback? Calling me names? Real original, Lorraine. Maybe next time bring a thesaurus." Before Lorraine could respond, Titan let out a bark so loud and sharp, it felt like it echoed across the park. Walter froze mid-step, his cocky demeanor faltering for just a moment. Around them, a few bystanders stopped and stared, unsure whether to intervene or just watch the drama unfold. Walter recovered quickly, though, and laughed nervously. "Oh, what's this? You gonna sick your mud on me now? Go ahead, give it a try. I'll make sure everyone sees just what kind of person you really are." Lorraine opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a firm voice cut through the tension like a knife. "What's going on here?" The voice belonged to none other than Mr. Garrett, a retired teacher and one of the few people in the neighborhood Lorraine truly respected. He stood a few feet away, leaning on his cane, his expression a mix of curiosity and disapproval. Walter turned to face him, the smugness fading just a bit. "Oh, nothing to worry about, Mr. Garrett," he said, his tone suddenly polite. "Just a little community engagement." Garrett wasn't buying it. He walked closer, his cane tapping rhythmically against the ground. "Doesn't look like community engagement to me," he said, his voice steady and calm. "Looks more like harassment." Lorraine felt a flicker of relief at his presence. She glanced at Garrett, silently thanking him for stepping in. Walter, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat. "Harassment? Come on, I'm just keeping an eye on things. You know, making sure everyone's following the rules." Garrett stopped a few feet away from Walter and looked him square in the eye. "You know, Walter," he said, his tone still calm but now with a sharp edge, "there's a fine line between keeping an eye on things and crossing a line, and from where I'm standing, you've crossed it." For a moment, Walter didn't say anything. His face turned a deep shade of red, and his mouth opened and closed, like he was searching for a comeback. Finally, he muttered something under his breath and took a step back. "Fine," he said, lowering his phone, "but don't think this is over." With that, he turned and walked away, his shoulders stiff and his steps quick. Garrett watched him go before turning to Lorraine. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. Lorraine nodded, though her hands were still trembling slightly. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Thanks, Mr. Garrett." He gave her a small nod, his expression kind but serious. "Next time he bothers you, let me know, or better yet, call the police. People like him need to be reminded they're not above the rules." As Garrett walked away, Lorraine let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Titan leaned against her leg, his warm presence a comforting reminder that she wasn't alone. But as she walked home, her mind raced. Walter might have backed off for now, but something told her this wasn't the last she'd see of him. The next morning, Lorraine decided she was done playing Walter's game. She grabbed Titan's leash and left for the park earlier than usual, hoping to avoid any drama. The air was crisp and the sun had barely risen, casting long shadows over the pathways. For a moment, it felt like she might actually get a peaceful walk, but peace wasn't in the cards. As she rounded the corner by the fountain, there he was, Walter. He was sitting on the edge of the fountain, holding a steaming cup of coffee, like he didn't have a care in the world. The moment he spotted her, his face lit up with that infuriating smirk she'd come to despise. "Well, if it isn't my favorite star of the morning show," he called out, his voice loud enough to echo across the empty park. He stood up slowly, like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. "Back for an encore, huh? I gotta say, you've got guts coming out here again. Let's hope your dog's got better manners today." Lorraine felt the anger rise in her chest, a slow burn that made her grip the leash a little tighter. Titan must have sensed it too. He let out a low growl, his ears pinned back, his gaze locked on Walter. But Lorraine kept her cool. She wasn't about to let this man ruin her day. Without a word, she turned and started walking in the opposite direction. "Oh, come on, don't walk away," Walter called after her, his voice dripping with fake disappointment. He started following her, his footsteps loud and deliberate. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just scared I'll get another Oscar-worthy video for the cops? By the way, they loved the last one. Said your monster was quite the star." Lorraine stopped so suddenly that Titan nearly bumped into her. She spun around, her eyes blazing. "Listen, Walter," she said, her voice sharp and steady. "You don't get to follow me around and harass me like this. It's not funny, it's not cute. It's stalking, and it's going to stop right now." Walter laughed, a loud, obnoxious sound that made her stomach twist. "Stalking? Oh, please. This is friendly attention. You know, you really should lighten up. Maybe even thank me for all this free publicity." That was the last straw, for Lorraine and for Titan. Before she could even process what was happening, Titan yanked the leash out of her hand and bolted toward Walter like a missile. "Titan, no!" Lorraine shouted, but it was too late. Walter barely had time to react before Titan was standing over him, his massive frame casting a shadow that seemed to grow with every second. Walter stumbled backward, his coffee flying out of his hand as he landed flat on his back. His face went pale, and for once, he was completely silent. Titan let out a deep, rumbling growl, the kind that made it clear he wasn't playing around. Walter raised his hands defensively, his eyes wide with panic. Okay, calm down. Call him off," he stammered, his voice shaking. But Titan didn't budge. Instead, his sharp eyes darted to a backpack Walter had dropped next to the fountain. Without warning, Titan grabbed the strap with his teeth and dragged it over to Lorraine, dropping it at her feet like it was a prize. "What are you doing? Leave that alone," Walter shouted, trying to sit up, but Titan let out another growl that froze him in place. Lorraine stared at the backpack, her heart racing. She bent down, unzipped it, and pulled out a stack of papers. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the documents, names, numbers, transactions. None of it looked right. It was the kind of paperwork that screamed, "This guy is up to no good." "Walter," Lorraine said, her voice icy, "what exactly is all this?" Walter scrambled to his feet, his face red with desperation. "None of your business, just give it back." By now, a small crowd had started to gather. People pulled out their phones, capturing the scene. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" while another said, "Looks like Walter finally met his match." Lorraine held up one of the papers for the crowd to see. "Looks like someone's been busy cooking the books," she said loudly, her tone calm but cutting. "Guess the cops are gonna love this even more than your little videos, huh?" Walter lunged forward, but Titan barked sharply, making him freeze in his tracks. "Don't even think about it," Lorraine warned. Minutes later, the sound of sirens broke through the murmurs of the crowd. A police car pulled up, and 2 officers stepped out. Lorraine handed over the documents and explained what had happened. Walter tried to protest, but his words were a jumbled mess of excuses that no one seemed to buy. The officers cuffed him right there by the fountain. As they led him to the car, Walter glared at Lorraine. "You think this is over?" he spat. Lorraine crossed her arms, a satisfied smile on her face. "Oh, I know it's over," she said. "For you, at least." As the police car drove away, the crowd began to disperse. Lorraine knelt down and wrapped her arms around Titan, who was wagging his tail like he hadn't just single-handedly brought a criminal to justice. "Good boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "You're my hero." Titan licked her face, and for the first time in days, Lorraine laughed. Whatever challenges came her way, she knew she could face them, as long as she had Titan by her side. How would you have handled this situation if you were in Lorraine's shoes? What do you think about how she stood up for herself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever experienced something similar? Don't forget to like this story if it inspired you and share it to spread awareness. This story was created to shed light on real-world issues and encourage positive change. Together, we can make the world a better place. Your opinion matters. Let's start the conversation.